You're falling through freezing air at 20,000 feet, watching your burning bomber spiral away, and you realize something terrifying. The parachute part isn't the hard bit. It's what happens after you land. Between 1943 and 1945, over 30,000 Allied airmen bailed out over German territory. Most people assume they became prisoners of war, spent time in camps, then went home with stories. That's what happened to some of them. But the reality was far more brutal, far more chaotic, and depended entirely on who found you first. The moment your boots hit German soil, you entered a lottery. And the odds weren't in your favour. Here's what the training manual told you. Bury your parachute, destroy your maps, move at night toward neutral territory. If captured, give only your name, rank and serial number. The Geneva Convention would protect you. German military personnel would treat you correctly. You'd be processed, interrogated briefly, then sent to a proper POW camp. That was the theory. The first problem started before you even landed. German civilians could see parachutes from miles away. White silk against blue sky or dark earth. By the time you hit the ground, people were already moving toward you. Farmers, townspeople, Hitler Youth members, and they just watched you bomb their cities. Lieutenant Robert Schaffer bailed out over Bavaria in March 1944. He landed in a field, hid his chute, and started walking. Within 20 minutes, he was surrounded by local villagers carrying pitchforks and axes. They didn't wait for military authorities, they didn't follow any convention. One man swung a shovel at his head. Schaffer survived only because a Wehrmacht officer arrived and fired his pistol in the air. Not everyone was that lucky. The distinction between military capture and civilian mob justice was everything. Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe personnel generally followed the rules. They were professional soldiers who understood the concept of honourable combat. Many German fighter pilots had been shot down themselves. They treated captured airmen as fellow warriors who'd simply lost this particular engagement. But civilians saw something different. They saw the men who'd incinerated Hamburg, who'd turned Dresden into an inferno, who'd killed their families, destroyed their homes, and reduced entire neighbourhoods to ash and rubble. The strategic bombing campaign had created a population that wanted revenge. The Nazi leadership knew this, and they encouraged it. In May 1944, Goebbels began a propaganda campaign that essentially gave civilians permission to murder downed airmen. He called them terror flyers and air gangsters. Official policy became deliberately ambiguous. The government wouldn't prosecute civilians who killed Allied airmen, claiming they couldn't control angry mobs. Police were instructed to approach crash sites slowly. This created a race. If military personnel reached you first, you'd probably survive. If civilians got there ahead of them, your chances dropped dramatically. Sergeant Michael Harrison bailed out near Cologne after his B-17 was hit. He landed in a residential area that had been bombed 2 days earlier. Residents were still pulling bodies from the rubble. They found him before any soldiers did. Witnesses later reported that a crowd of about 40 people beat him to death with clubs and bricks. No one was ever charged. The Luftwaffe actually tried to prevent these killings. Fighter pilots would sometimes escort parachuting airmen down, circling overhead to mark the location for rescue teams. Some even landed nearby to protect downed enemies until military authorities arrived. There are documented cases of German pilots threatening civilians at gunpoint to prevent mob violence. But they couldn't be everywhere. Your survival often depended on pure geography. Bail out over a rural area. Farmers might detain you roughly but hand you over intact. Come down near a recently bombed city. The chances of making it to military custody drop to maybe 50-50. Land directly in an urban area that had been hit hard? Those odds plummeted. The SS presented a different problem entirely. They weren't bound by military conventions and actively participated in executions. There are records of SS units shooting captured airmen immediately, then reporting they'd been killed trying to escape, or claiming civilians had acted before they could intervene. The paperwork often got conveniently lost. 26 American airmen were murdered in Rüsselsheim in August 1944. Their bomber crashed near the town. Local Nazi Party officials organised what they called a people's court that lasted about 15 minutes, then handed the survivors over to a mob. The airmen were beaten, stabbed, and stoned to death in the street. This wasn't a spontaneous eruption, it was orchestrated. After the war, some perpetrators were prosecuted. Most weren't. The chaos of Germany's collapse meant evidence disappeared and witnesses scattered. Many killers simply blended back into civilian life. So when you jumped from that burning aircraft, you weren't just escaping immediate death. You were entering hostile territory where the rules had broken down, where your uniform might protect you or mark you for execution, where everything depended on who reached you first. The strange part? Some airmen were treated with surprising decency, offered cigarettes, given food, escorted safely to proper military facilities. The experience was wildly inconsistent, which somehow made it worse. You literally couldn't know what to expect. But there was one thing every captured airman faced, regardless of how they were taken: the interrogation center at Oberursel, just outside Frankfurt. It was called Auswärterstelle West, but Allied airmen knew it by another name: Dulag Luft. And what happened inside that facility was far more sophisticated than anything you'd face from an angry mob. Dulag Luft looked almost normal from the outside. Clean buildings, organised grounds, nothing like the camps you'd heard about. That was intentional. Everything about this place was designed to make you talk. You'd arrive exhausted, injured, and disoriented. The standard procedure started with solitary confinement in a cell about 6 feet by 9 feet, bare walls, a cot, nothing else. Temperature control was the first tool they'd use against you. The radiator would blast heat until the room became unbearable, then cut off completely, leaving you shivering. Sleep deprivation came next. Guards would wake you every hour for days straight. Your mind would start playing tricks after 72 hours of this. Then came the interrogator, usually an officer who spoke perfect English, American accent, not British. They'd studied at universities in the States before the war. Some had actually lived in New York or California for years. They knew baseball statistics, could discuss Hollywood films. One interrogator had worked in Detroit and could talk in detail about automobile manufacturing, which would surprise factory workers from Michigan. The approach was never what you expected. No threats, no violence. They'd offer you coffee, real coffee, not the ersatz garbage German civilians were drinking. They'd light you a cigarette, American cigarettes from Red Cross packages intended for prisoners. Then they'd start talking, just casual conversation at first. They already knew everything about you, your name, rank, and serial number. They had that before you walked in. But they'd also reference your training base, your squadron commander's name, the bar you drank at in England, sometimes even your girlfriend's name from letters they'd recovered from crashed aircraft. This psychological tactic was devastating. If they knew all this, what was the point of resisting? The interrogator would slide a form across the table. Just basic information, he'd explain. Red Cross paperwork so your family can be notified that you're alive. Completely standard under the Geneva Convention. The form asked innocent-seeming questions while gathering intelligence. What type of aircraft? What squadron? What base? What was your target today? The questions were buried among legitimate requests for next-of-kin information. Many airmen filled it out. They were exhausted, disoriented, and convinced that the Germans already possessed this information. Why not cooperate with what seemed like humanitarian paperwork? That single form often provided enough data to map entire bombing group compositions and identify gaps in defensive formations. But the real intelligence came from conversations, not forms. The interrogator might mention casually that he knew your group had switched to a different assembly point last month. Just making conversation, establishing rapport. You'd correct him without thinking. Actually, that was 2 months ago. Congratulations. You just confirmed a change in operational procedure and provided the timeline. Or he'd express sympathy about your aircraft losses. Must be tough losing so many crews to flak over the Ruhr Valley. You'd respond that flak wasn't the real problem, it was the new fighter tactics near the target. Another piece of intelligence was delivered voluntarily. These men were extraordinarily skilled at extracting information through conversation that felt nothing like interrogation. Some airmen recognized the technique and refused to engage beyond name, rank, and serial number. That's when conditions in the cell would deteriorate, the heat would become more extreme, food would decrease to starvation rations, the isolation would extend for weeks. Most men eventually talked, even if just a little. The interrogators only needed fragments. They'd collect pieces from dozens of prisoners and assemble complete pictures of Allied operations. The facility kept meticulous records. Every prisoner interview was documented. Information was cross-referenced, verified, and catalogued. German intelligence officers could tell you the combat formation of any American bomb group, the names of squadron commanders, even which crews were considered the most skilled. They maintained organizational charts of entire air forces, updated constantly with fresh intelligence from interrogations. After Dulag Luft came the actual prisoner camps. Stalag Luft III was the most famous, thanks to the Great Escape in 1944. 76 men tunneled out, 73 were recaptured, 50 of those were executed by the Gestapo on Hitler's direct order. Shot in small groups and cremated, their ashes were returned to the camp in urns. That execution order revealed something important about your status as an airman prisoner. You existed in a strange middle space, protected by some conventions, excluded from others. The Wehrmacht generally followed rules regarding your treatment. The Nazi Party and the SS did not. Which authority controlled your fate at any given moment was essentially random. Camp life itself was survivable if you were lucky. Food was scarce but present. Red Cross packages supplemented German rations. You could receive mail, though it took months. The boredom was crushing. Some men studied languages or took correspondence courses. Others planned elaborate, usually impossible escape attempts. You'd spend years waiting, wondering if you'd survive to see liberation. The airmen who never made it to camps had worse fates. Some were transferred to concentration camps after interrogation, particularly if they were Jewish. Others disappeared entirely into the SS system. Records would show they arrived at Dulag Luft, then nothing. No transfer papers, no death certificate, just absence. Liberation came from the East and West simultaneously in 1945. Now, some camps were freed by Americans, others by the Soviets. The conditions you'd face afterward depended entirely on which army reached you first. But that's another story entirely. What matters is understanding the complete picture of what happened after you bailed out. The statistics focused on survival rates during combat. They rarely mentioned what came after, the mob violence, the sophisticated interrogation, the years of captivity, the executions that violated every convention of war. Tens of thousands of Allied airmen were captured. Most survived to tell their stories, many didn't, and the ones who made it home carried those experiences forever. The survival lottery didn't end when the war did. Former prisoners returned home with injuries that never fully healed, memories that wouldn't fade, and questions nobody could answer. Why did some crews get mobbed while others received cigarettes? Why did one interrogator use psychological manipulation while another used starvation? There was no logic to it, no pattern you could learn to predict, just chaos wearing a uniform. The men who bailed out over Germany didn't just fight a war in the air, they fought a different kind of battle on the ground, one where the rules kept changing and survival depended on nothing you could control. That's the reality nobody prepared them for.